Usually when you buy a house, there is a basic expectation of structural reality.
Right.
You look at the foundation and it's solid concrete. You examine the load-bearing walls, there's sturdy timber, you move in, you unpack your boxes, and you just inherently trust the floor to hold your weight.
Well, yeah, it's a fundamental assumption. I mean, you don't wake up every morning, cautiously tap the floorboards with your toe to make sure they're still solid, and then, like, carefully tiptoe to the kitchen. You just walk. The structure is an invisible guarantee.
Exactly. But imagine you wake up one day, you pour your coffee, you take a normal step, and your foot goes straight through the oak floorboards.
Oh, man.
The wood just turns to dust, termites, dry rot, decades of, invisible decay. And the terrifying part is that the house looks exactly the same from the outside. The paint is fresh, the roof is perfectly shingled, the lawn is mowed, but the structural integrity underneath is entirely irreparably gone.
That image captures the precise anatomy of an institutional collapse. I mean, it always looks perfectly fine until the exact microsecond it shatters. The facade outlives the foundation.
Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we are functioning as your daily morning roundup. Our mission on this show is to take a massive stack of the day's most dense, complex, and culturally significant material, extract the critical insights, and thread them together to show you the bigger picture.
Yeah, and we are looking at a spectacular amount of data today.
We really are. We're mapping a conservative media empire that is allegedly in free fall. We're analyzing shifting theological battles inside massive Christian denominations. We're looking at terrifying new statistics on the absolute collapse of modern marriage. And we are unpacking the clinical psychology behind modern gender grievances.
And, while that sounds like 4 entirely different shows, like YouTube drama over here, ancient theology over there, and clinical psychology right in the middle, when you actually map this material out, a singular, undeniable theme emerges.
Yeah, the floorboards.
Exactly. We are watching the fracturing of traditional top-down institutions and the chaotic, messy realignment of family, faith, and culture. We're literally watching the floorboards give way across multiple pillars of society all at the exact same time.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we take that first step, I need to set the table for you. Some of the material on the docket today contains intensely charged political, cultural, and theological arguments.
Very charged.
We're talking deep right-wing critiques, left-wing structural analysis, and highly orthodox religious worldviews. As your host for the Morning Roundup, we are going to present this information to you impartially.
Right. We aren't here to endorse these worldviews or tell you how to vote.
Definitely not. Our job is to give you the unvarnished map of the ideas actively shaping the culture. Sometimes looking at raw data and unfiltered arguments is going to push your buttons and challenge your worldview. That's a good thing. That is exactly what this show is designed to do.
So to understand how these massive institutional floorboards rot, you have to look at the media landscape, because that is where the decay is most visible right now. We are looking at the Daily Wire, the massive conservative media apparatus founded by Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring.
The juggernaut.
Yeah, for the last decade, they have been the undisputed juggernaut of right-wing digital media. But the internal numbers coming out now are painting a picture of an empire in absolute freefall.
The data we're looking at is just staggering. Around May 2026, the Daily Wire reportedly initiated massive layoffs. The conservative estimates say they cut roughly 13% of their staff.
But when you look at third-party trackers like Layoff Hedge and corroborating statements from former hosts like Candace Owens, the cuts might actually be closer to 50%.
Wow.
We are talking about roughly 100 jobs slashed from a remaining staff of 200. And this is their second major round of quiet layoffs in a single year.
Which you really have to contextualize with their viewership data. Ben Shapiro's flagship YouTube channel viewership plummeted by 85% in 2023.
It's unbelievable.
At the absolute peak of their cultural influence, they were pulling in 170 million monthly views. Now, they are struggling to maintain somewhere between 18 and 28 million.
And for a media company whose entire valuation and cultural leverage is built on digital dominance and algorithmic supremacy, an 85% drop isn't a slump. Industry analysts are looking at that curve and calling it a catastrophic collapse.
Wait, I have to push back on this data right out of the gate. Is an 85% drop really a collapse, or is that just the natural life cycle of a highly political channel adjusting to a non-election year? I mean, every major news network bleeds viewers when the political news cycle cools down.
That's a fair point.
Are we just looking at a media company aging out of a temporary algorithmic spike, or are you arguing this is a systemic failure?
It's a great question, but the data points to a systemic, terminal failure to adapt, compounded by an immense amount of corporate hubris. Well, if it were just an election cycle dip, you would see a proportionate drop across all conservative media.
Yeah.
But that isn't happening. Independent creators are surging.
Mm.
The Daily Wire's failure is specific to their business model.
Right.
They built their initial empire on inexpensive, highly viral, clickbaity content during the Wild West Facebook era. Think back to 2015.
Oh, yeah, the SJW owned by Facts and Logic debate clips.
Exactly. That content cost nothing to produce, it was highly algorithmic, and it grew their audience exponentially. But instead of adapting to the current era, which demands vitalistic, decentralized, highly authentic creators, they decided to take their digital revenue and build a localized, bloated, conservative version of Hollywood in Nashville.
They pivoted to prestige.
They pivoted to prestige, and the ultimate symbol of this disconnect is a project they produced called the Pendragon Cycle.
Oh, boy.
They dumped a reported $10 million into a 7-episode, highly produced fantasy series shot on location in Italy and Hungary.
Wait, $10 million for a daily political commentary company to make a fantasy show. That feels like a legacy cable network trying to build a streaming service from scratch, but completely forgetting the core product their audience actually tunes in for.
The critique of this pivot is just brutal in the sources. Analysts describe it as an unwanted, stodgy, conservative version of woke media.
Conservative version of woke media. That's rough.
It completely misunderstands the psychology of the modern consumer. People are not clamoring for highly produced, high-friction, serialized conservative television. The friction alone is crazy.
Right, making a user leave YouTube.
Yeah, making them leave YouTube, download a specific proprietary app, pay a premium subscription, and commit to a 7-hour serialized drama. It's an incredibly outdated model of media consumption. It's basically a boomer-era television strategy applied to a Gen Z digital landscape.
While they are bleeding capital on these massive prestige boondoggles, they are simultaneously alienating the exact audience they desperately need to survive. And this is where the sociological analysis gets really interesting.
Oh, the mean girl stuff.
Yes. The internal culture at the Daily Wire is being described by industry insiders as mean girl gatekeeping. The argument is that Shapiro and his executive network are operating like the Regina George of the conservative space.
It's a brilliant sociological comparison. Think about the archetype of the high school queen bee. She demands absolute unthinking compliance from her clique.
Yep.
And she utterly destroys the social standing of anyone who questions her authority. The analysis shows that Daily Wire leadership began utilizing what are essentially woke weapons against their own ideological allies.
When major, highly influential figures in their space, people like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, or Nick Fuentes, stepped out of line on specific issues, particularly regarding foreign policy or critiques of Israel, the Daily Wire didn't just engage them in debate.
No, they didn't write an op-ed dismantling their arguments. They went straight for the nuclear option of social ostracization.
They allegedly deployed terms like anti-Semite or bigot to completely deplatform these creators. And the psychological backlash to this tactic from their own audience has been severe.
Which makes total sense.
Okay.
When you use the defining tactics of the left, guilt by association, cancel culture, and aggressive moral policing against a conservative audience that fundamentally views itself as a rebellious, anti-institutional free speech movement, that audience is going to turn on you violently.
You can't market yourself as the punk rock alternative to mainstream media while aggressively enforcing mainstream corporate speech codes.
Exactly. And that profound desperation to maintain an illusion of relevance and authority leads us to the most bizarre and fascinating data anomaly in this entire media analysis.
The view-botting allegations.
The view-botting. If you understand the mechanics of the modern YouTube algorithm, there is a very predictable retention curve. Shorter, punchier, highly edited videos generally get massive view counts because the barrier to entry is low.
Right, you click a 10-minute video without thinking about it.
But longer, unedited, hour-plus podcast episodes get far fewer views. However, they have incredibly high retention rates and deep engagement from hardcore, dedicated fans.
But when analysts look under the hood of Shapiro's channel, they are finding the exact opposite dynamic occurring to a degree that defies basic algorithmic physics.
It's completely backwards.
His short-form clips, the 10 to 15-minute videos specifically designed for virality, are absolutely bombing. They are barely scraping 12,000 to 16,000 views.
Yeah.
But his long-form, hour-plus daily political episodes are magically hitting exactly 500,000 views day after day with almost zero variance.
And the engagement metrics on those 500,000 views are completely broken. A deep dive comparison was run against much smaller independent channels. A typical independent video with 13,000 views will organically generate over 900 comments and vibrant community interaction.
Okay.
Shapiro's videos, sitting at 200,000 to 500,000 views, are pulling in fewer than 860 comments.
That makes no sense.
Furthermore, the top liked comments on the Shapiro video have drastically fewer upvotes than the comments on the channel, with a fraction of the audience.
Let's break down the math on that, because that is the smoking gun.
Yeah.
You do not get 20 times the viewership with 20 times lower engagement unless the viewership is entirely synthetic.
You just can't.
You cannot have 500,000 human beings watch an hour of highly charged political commentary and leave zero digital footprint in the comment section.
The analysis strongly concludes that this data indicates systemic view botting. They are allegedly paying click farms or utilizing automated bots to artificially inflate the view counts on the flagship show.
Why?
To maintain the illusion of an empire. If the advertisers in the audience realize the king has no clothes, the entire Nashville operation collapses.
What's fascinating here is the sheer arrogance of top-down control. The old guard is spending millions of dollars trying to force heavily manicured, highly policed, ideologically stagnant content onto the masses. But the actual audience has already moved on. They are flocking to what analysts call vitalistic creators.
Vitalistic is the perfect word for this shift. It means content that is alive, organic, chaotic, unpolished, and intensely high energy.
Yeah.
The audience doesn't want a $10 million fantasy show. They want decentralized, fun creators. They want irreverent, independently animated cartoons like Freedom Toons. They want the bizarre, hyper-creative, skybrow cinematic universe, making catchy, politically incorrect music videos.
The energy has fundamentally shifted from top-down, corporate institutional control to bottom-up, organic, chaotic vitalism.
And that exact transition, the catastrophic failure of centralized, rigid authority to control a shifting, decentralized populace, isn't just happening in the digital media space.
No, it's not. We are seeing this identical dynamic tearing through the foundational structures of the church.
Let's look at the data coming out of the Christian Reformed Church, the CRCNA, and the fallout surrounding their upcoming Synod of 2026.
Okay, the CRCNA provides a perfect microcosm of institutional religious collapse. For context, this denomination just waged a massive, bruising, deeply theological war from 2022 to 2024 over the issue of same-sex marriage and human sexuality.
A literal multi-year battle.
Yes, and the end result of that battle was the institutional exiling of their progressive mainline faction. They effectively purged the left wing of their church. But now that the war is over and the perceived enemy is gone, the denomination is looking around the empty room and realizing they have absolutely no unified identity.
It's the classic post-war power vacuum. You unite disparate factions to defeat a common enemy. But the second the peace treaty is signed, the internal fractures widen into chasms.
Oh, true.
The analysis outlines the two remaining factions that are now fighting for control of the denomination's future. On one side, you have the strict confessionalists.
And who are they?
These are mostly bolstered by the young, restless, and reformed demographic hyper-theological Gen Xers and millennials. They want to enforce strict, unyielding creedal alignment from the top down. They want high theological walls, rigorous discipline, and absolute purity.
And on the opposing side of this internal civil war, you have the broad, moderate evangelicals. This group isn't terribly anxious about deep historical theological distinctives.
Right, they just want normal church.
Yeah, they are perfectly comfortable with standard American evangelicalism. They utilize seeker-friendly models, modern worship bands, and corporate church growth strategies. They strategically voted alongside the confessionalists to exile the progressives, but they have zero desire to live in a rigid, hyper-policed theological fortress where every servant is audited for doctrinal purity.
I want to bring in a brilliant analogy from another theological review we analyzed concerning the Church of England, because it perfectly captures what these top-down denominations are doing wrong. The critique argues that modern central churches are trying to operate religion like a widget-making factory.
The widget factory. That is a devastating critique of modern polity.
It really is. A factory prioritizes rigid efficiency, highly organized programs, and standardized rules dictated by a corporate board. The goal is to manufacture identical Christians on an assembly line.
Right. They want a standardized product. If you walk into a CRCNA church in Michigan, they want it to sound, look, and believe exactly identically to a CRCNA church in California.
Exactly.
But religion isn't a manufactured good. It's an organic, varied community of localized voices. And the primary insight we're pulling from this data is that this widget factory approach, this attempt to reshape the denomination from the synod down to the local pew, is failing for the exact same reason the Daily Wire's $10 million television show is failing. The market dynamics have fundamentally changed.
And applying the concept of a market to ancient church polity makes a lot of theologians uncomfortable, but it is the reality of the digital age. We live in a hyper-connected, deeply saturated religious marketplace.
We really do.
The most profound observation in this ecclesiastical analysis is that local, mid-level denominational leaders actually have significantly less influence over their own congregations than internet podcasters and YouTube theologians.
Let's break down the mechanics of why that happens, because it's fascinating. If a guy sitting in the pew in Ohio is listening to 5 hours of John Piper, Tim Keller, or Doug Wilson podcasts while he commutes to work all week, and he only listens to his local, denominationally approved pastor for 30 minutes on a Sunday morning, the internet voice wins.
The bandwidth battle is entirely lopsided.
The central denomination cannot force confessional compliance because the parishioners have already outsourced their spiritual formation to the decentralized internet. The local pastor isn't the primary shepherd anymore. He's just the guy providing the Sunday morning venue.
So if top-down media gatekeeping is failing and top-down denominational enforcement is failing, where is the vitalistic energy actually going?
Where does it go?
It is shifting hyperlocal. The data points to a massive surge in classical church planting models, particularly accelerating in places like Florida.
Okay, Florida.
Yeah, these are leaders who are entirely ignoring the bureaucratic political infighting of the central denominational committees. They are focusing exclusively on their immediate physical geography. They are building local classical schools. They are engaging in state voucher programs. They are buying physical land.
So they're just opting out of the top-down fight entirely.
Completely. The future of these institutions is not going to be dictated by a central synod issuing edicts from a boardroom. It is organically growing from the ground up by local leaders taking extreme localized ownership.
Which brings us to a seamless pivot regarding how this localized ownership is manifesting in the daily lives of these leaders. Because with centralized power structures fading across the board, individuals are being forced to integrate their faith, their labor, and their legacy in entirely new, holistic ways.
We are looking at labor statistics showing that the vast majority of local pastors today are bivocational. They do not just preach on Sundays, they work a regular secular job in the marketplace during the week.
Historically, particularly in the 20th century, the church viewed bivocational ministry as a failure.
Right.
The narrative was, oh, it's a shame the congregation is too small or too poor to pay the pastor a full-time salary, so he has to moonlight as a plumber or a software engineer to feed his kids. It was seen as a distraction from his real holy work.
But the theological framework we are analyzing entirely reframes this through what is called the theology of work and the theology of business.
I love this framework. The theology of work argues that your 9-to-5 job is not a secular, meaningless grind that you just suffer through to pay the mortgage and fund your real life on the weekends.
It posits that labor is a direct continuation of the mandate given to humanity in the Garden of Eden.
Yes.
The idea that mankind was commanded to take dominion, to create value, to cultivate the earth, and to bring order out of chaos. Under this framework, business is explicitly defined as blessing others at scale.
It's a profound paradigm shift. Think about it. If you are a plumber fixing a catastrophic leak in a widow's home or an engineer designing a safer bridge, you are solving a genuine problem.
You're helping people.
You are providing a service that tangibly improves human life. You are blessing them. A business is simply a systemic mechanism to deliver that blessing to hundreds or thousands of people efficiently.
This completely destroys the artificial mid-century dichotomy between secular work and sacred ministry.
Sure.
If you are building value, all of life is a mission.
The text provides this incredible historical anecdote that perfectly illustrates this integration. They look at Elijah Craig, an 18th century Baptist minister in Virginia and Kentucky.
Oh, this guy is amazing.
This guy did not sit in an ivory tower study all week writing highly academic sermons. He was a force of nature. He preached the gospel from a literal jail cell when the state arrested him for preaching without a government license.
But he didn't stop there.
No. He looked at his town and realized they needed infrastructure, so he started the local fire department. He realized the kids needed education, so he founded a classical Christian academy. And, just for good measure, he opened a distillery and is widely credited with inventing the process for making Kentucky bourbon.
Elijah Craig is the absolute antithesis of the isolated, hyper-specialized, alienated modern corporate worker. He wasn't waiting for a top-down institution, a synod, or a government grant to give him permission or funding to improve his society.
He just did it.
He simply looked at his immediate physical community, identified the localized needs, whether that was spiritual salvation, a mechanism to stop buildings from burning down, or a really good stiff drink, and he just built it himself. It is the ultimate expression of hyper-local vitalism.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We are talking about the physical legacy of our daily work, the tangible things we build with our hands and leave for our children.
Right.
But our next set of texts takes us from our physical legacy straight into our literal, biological, and theological legacy. We are diving into a deep, ancient debate regarding the actual origin of the human soul.
This is arguably the most complex material on the docket today,
Yeah.
but it connects directly to this overarching theme of generational continuity and what exactly we pass down to our children when the institutions fail.
The two primary theological frameworks competing in these texts are creationism and traducianism, and we need to clarify our terms immediately.
Very important.
In this specific theological context, creationism has absolutely nothing to do with the debate about Genesis, evolution, or the physical age of the earth.
Right, completely different category.
In the theology of the soul, creationism is the doctrine that God directly creates a brand new, pristine, totally unique soul out of nothing for every single human baby at the exact moment of conception, and then places that pristine soul into the physical body that was biologically generated by the parents.
It views the soul as a direct, immediate, and individualized creation of God.
Yeah.
But the texts we are analyzing strongly advocate for the minority view in church history, an ancient concept called traducianism.
Traducianism.
Yeah. This doctrine, which was championed by early church fathers like Tertullian, argues that the human soul, exactly like the physical body, is inherited directly from the mother and the father through natural generation.
Inherited.
The argument is that you don't just inherit your father's jawline and your mother's eye color through physical DNA. You inherit an amalgamation of their actual spiritual substance as well.
I know exactly what you are thinking right now listening to this because it's the first question I asked when I read this. How on earth do you divide a soul?
It sounds impossible.
Right. A soul isn't a physical object. If a father gives part of his soul to create his child, does the father now have less of a soul? Does his spiritual battery drain with every kid he has?
The text anticipates this biological confusion and provides a brilliant ancient analogy to explain the mechanics. The flame.
The flame is the perfect metaphysical metaphor.
It really is. If you take a lit candle and you use that flame to light a second unlit candle, what happens? The original flame does not divide in half.
No.
It doesn't lose 50% of its heat or brightness. The fire simply replicates its nature onto the new material. The traducian argument is that human reproduction works the exact same way spiritually.
A new soul is ignited by the union of the parents.
Passed down like a flame lighting another flame, continuing an unbroken spiritual chain all the way back to the first humans.
We're going to break down exactly why this specific theological text so aggressively champions this view, because the domino effect of this doctrine touches everything from sin to modern politics.
First, the theologians argue that traducianism is the only logical way to explain the mechanics of original sin.
Let's follow their logic on that. If the creationist view is true, if God creates a brand new, perfect, pristine soul for every single baby, how does that baby become inherently sinful?
Right. Does a holy God deliberately create a corrupt, sinful soul from scratch?
The text argues that if God directly creates sinful souls, it makes God the author of evil, which is a theological impossibility in Orthodox Christianity.
But if traducianism is true, and the soul is naturally passed down through biological generation from the parents, then the soul naturally inherits the spiritual guilt and the fallen, corrupted nature of Adam, exactly the same way a child inherits a genetic predisposition to a physical disease.
It provides a mechanical, generational explanation for human corruption.
Secondly, the text argues that this doctrine perfectly explains the impeccability of Christ, the core Christian doctrine that Jesus was entirely without a sinful nature.
Because Jesus was miraculously conceived by the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary, entirely bypassing a human biological father, He did not inherit the fallen, corrupted spiritual seed of Adam that is passed down through the male lineage.
Traducianism provides the mechanical framework for why the virgin birth was biologically and spiritually necessary.
It is a fascinating, tightly woven logical system, but this is where the morning roundup requires us to look at the full scope of the argument.
Yeah, we have to look at the whole picture.
The specific authors of this text do not stop at ancient Christology. They actively drag this 2,000-year-old theological concept directly into the 21st century political arena. And we are going to present this strictly as the argument made in the text, allowing you to weigh the heavy implications.
The authors explicitly use the doctrine of traducianism to justify a political worldview they call race realism.
Race realism.
The text argues that because human souls are passed down through localized families, tribes, and specific lineages, just like physical traits, there are distinct, inherent, and unalterable physical and spiritual differences among different global populations.
They aggressively use this theology to attack blank slate liberalism.
Which is the idea that all humans are entirely interchangeable cogs who will behave identically if put in the same environment.
Right. They extrapolate this ancient theology to advocate for highly specific right-wing civil applications regarding strict national borders, anti-immigration policies, and maintaining specific demographic majorities.
Regardless of how you react to that specific, highly charged political extrapolation, the crucial thread to pull from this theology is the intense, almost obsessive focus on inheritance.
Inheritance, what are we passing down?
Right. If legacy, family formation, and the passing down of spiritual and physical traits are the absolute bedrock of human civilization, why are the institutions that facilitate family formation failing so spectacularly right now?
Which brings us to the most terrifying data set in our entire docket today. If the nuclear family is the foundational building block of society, the statistics show that the block has been dynamited into dust. We are looking at a catastrophic collapse in modern marriage.
The numbers are almost hard to comprehend.
They are.
Let's look at the historical baseline. In 1975, 91% of women in the United States were married by the age of 30. It was the default setting of adult life.
91%.
By 2025, that number had plummeted to roughly 25%.
And for men, the drop is equally, if not more, catastrophic. In 1975, 81% of men were married by 30. Today, it sits at 16.5%.
This raises an important question. How do you engineer a society where the fundamental biological and social imperative of the species just disappears in a single generation?
We went from a society where family formation was the assumed default rhythm of existence to a society where getting married in your 20s is a statistical anomaly.
The sociological analysis breaks this collapse down into two massive fronts, the brutal economic realities and the shifting legal and cultural drivers.
Let's unpack the economics first, because you just cannot ignore the math here. The barrier to entry for family formation has skyrocketed out of reach for the average citizen. The data highlights the housing market as the primary culprit.
Oh, absolutely.
In 1975, the average home price in the United States was around $38,000. Today, that average has breached $403,000. And wage growth has remained relatively stagnant when adjusted for that level of inflation. You are asking young couples to take on nearly $500,000 of debt just to secure a basic physical shelter to raise a child in.
And you have to compound that mortgage debt with the student debt crisis, which exploded from $8 billion total in 1975 to over $1.6 trillion today.
$1.6 trillion.
But the analysis makes a fascinating, deeply uncomfortable connection between that college debt and the marriage rate. As society aggressively pushed for women to pursue bachelor's and master's degrees and enter the corporate workforce, they naturally delayed family formation.
Right.
But the sociological data shows an unyielding biological reality regarding female hypergamy.
Which means,
statistically speaking, and we are talking broad demographic trends, not every single individual women strongly prefer to marry men who earn equal to or more than they do and who hold equal or higher social status.
it's the assortative mating dilemma. By vastly increasing female education and corporate earning power over the last 40 years, while male higher education enrollment and middle-class earning power simultaneously stagnated or dropped, society drastically shrank the pool of men that modern women consider to be eligible, attractive suitors.
Exactly. You have millions of young men who are crushed by debt, working gig economy jobs, and priced out of the housing market. And you have millions of highly educated young women who look at those men and say, I am not legally attaching myself to a financial liability.
But the economics are only half the story. The cultural and legal drivers have fundamentally altered the risk-reward calculus of the marriage contract itself. And the primary legal culprit, highlighted by the analysts, is the nationwide introduction of no-fault divorce in the late 1960s and 70s.
The historical context here is fascinating and often misunderstood. The analysis points out that no-fault divorce was not initially designed as a grand feminist victory for female liberation.
It wasn't.
No, it was originally lobbied for and pushed by men specifically, figures like Hugh Hefner and the early architects of the sexual revolution.
Daniel Hefner.
Yeah. Why? Because under the old legal system, if a man wanted to leave his wife for his secretary, he was legally at fault for the dissolution of the contract. The courts would absolutely devastate him financially in the settlement to protect the abandoned wife.
Right, there were consequences.
Hefner and his cohorts wanted a legal mechanism for wealthy men to abandon their aging families without facing total financial ruin. They wanted consequence-free bachelorhood.
But then, the historical analysis notes, the legal mechanism was entirely co-opted by second-wave feminism. And the result of that legal shift over the last 50 years is profound.
Very profound.
Today, the data shows that women initiate roughly 70% of all divorces in the United States. And if college degrees are involved, that number pushes closer to 90%. Wow. For the primary earner in a household, which historically, and still often today, tends to be the man, marriage is no longer a permanent, lifelong, culturally enforced covenant. Legally, it is an easily dissolved, highly precarious contract where he stands a 50% chance of losing his accumulated assets, a massive percentage of his future income through alimony, and daily access to his own children, often without having committed any specific fault or abuse.
From a purely cold actuarial perspective, the legal risk profile of modern marriage has become a massive liability for young men. They are looking at the legal system, looking at the divorce statistics, and simply choosing to opt out of the contract entirely.
And this leads to a highly controversial sociological argument regarding the fundamental nature of female dependence.
Oh, this is the part that makes people really mad.
Oh yeah, modern Western society absolutely despises the word dependence. We prize autonomy, independence, and the girl boss narrative above all else. But the sociological text argues that women, driven by deep evolutionary biology and historical precedent, inherently seek out protection, resource provision, and stability due to the extreme vulnerabilities associated with pregnancy and child rearing.
The provocative argument here is that modern women haven't actually become independent. They have simply shifted their dependence away from individual traditional husbands and outsourced it directly to the state and corporate structures.
It's a structural replacement of the patriarch.
Think about it. If a woman knows she has the state government as a guaranteed financial backstop through welfare or subsidized childcare, or if she has a massive corporate HR department guaranteeing her income, healthcare, and security, the biological imperative to secure a highly capable male provider drops to near zero.
She doesn't need to marry young to survive.
Furthermore, she is highly incentivized to leave a marriage the moment she becomes emotionally dissatisfied, because the government and the corporation have effectively replaced the husband as the ultimate provider of physical security. The husband is reduced to a luxury item, and luxury items are easily discarded when they become inconvenient.
Which paints an incredibly bleak economic and legal reality. But our next set of data argues that the economics are merely the symptom.
Just a symptom.
The true disease that is actively keeping men and women alienated from each other is a deep, systemic, psychological, and ideological rot.
We're looking at clinical psychiatric literature that attempts to explain a paradox. Why are modern women reportedly more miserable, heavily medicated, and depressed today, despite having more freedom, higher education, and greater career success than at any point in human history?
The clinical analysis outlines 3 specific psychological mechanisms that form what they diagnose as female grievance culture. And these mechanisms, they argue, are actively arresting adult psychological maturation and destroying the fundamental capacity for romantic relationship success. Mechanism number 1 is the externalization of blame.
Let's break down the psychology of that. In clinical psychology, there's a core concept called the locus of control.
Locus of control.
If you have an internal locus of control, you fundamentally believe your own choices, your work ethic, and your behaviors dictate the outcome of your life. If you have an external locus of control, you believe society, bad luck, the system, or other people are entirely responsible for your failures and your emotional state.
The psychiatric argument here is that modern algorithmic feminism actively trains young women to locate the cause of their dissatisfaction entirely on external factors. Men are the problem, the patriarchy is the problem, unrealistic beauty standards are the problem, late-stage capitalism is the problem.
And we have to understand why that is so seductive. Externalizing blame is incredibly protective of the ego in the short term. If you are unhappy and it is entirely society's fault, then nothing is your fault. You are absolved of guilt.
But in the long term, that exact defense mechanism prevents you from ever maturing into an actual adult.
Right. If everything is always your partner's fault, you never develop the capacity for introspection. You never have to sit down and ask, wait, was I unfair in that argument? Am I demanding too much? What flaws do I need to change?
If you lose the ability to take personal responsibility, you become completely incapable of sustaining a long-term compromising marriage. That inability to compromise leads directly into mechanism number 2, victimhood identity.
And the text provides a perfect viral example of this with the current social media obsession over the mental load. If you spend 5 minutes on TikTok, you will see endless videos of women complaining about the mental load.
What exactly does that mean?
This refers to the invisible, administrative work of family planning, anticipating the kids' shoe sizes, organizing the family calendar, remembering the in-laws' birthdays, knowing when the milk is going to run out.
Now, historically and sociologically, that is just normal baseline family asymmetry.
Men and women carry different complementary burdens in a functioning household.
Exactly. A man might carry the intense, silent stress of ensuring the mortgage is paid, managing the yard labor, and handling the physical security of the house, while the woman manages the complex internal logistics of the family schedule.
But grievance culture takes that normal, mundane asymmetry and artificially reframes it as malicious, patriarchal exploitation.
Yes, the analysis shows how toxic this framing is. Instead of a wife looking at her husband, who perhaps brings in the majority of the income, works 50 hours a week, and loves his kids, and feeling gratitude, she's trained by the culture to look at a dirty dish left by the sink and deduce an entire conspiracy.
Right. She thinks he left a dish out, therefore he doesn't respect my time, therefore he expects me to be his maid,
Right.
therefore I am being exploited.
The marriage is instantly transformed into a zero-sum game of constant suspicion. Ordinary, completely normal human flaws, like a guy forgetting to buy paper towels, are interpreted as deliberate male malice.
Which is exacerbated to lethal levels by the third mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
rewarded antagonism and the rise of therapy speak.
Therapy speak might be the most destructive linguistic trend of the decade. We have taken highly specific clinical psychiatric language words meant to describe severe trauma or personality disorders, and we have weaponized them for everyday, mundane, marital disagreements.
Let's walk through how this actually plays out in a living room.
Mhm.
A husband and wife are having a completely normal, slightly heated argument about how much money they spent on vacation.
Mm,
Historically, you argue, you compromise, you apologize, and you move on.
sure.
But with therapy speak, the wife isn't just angry or disappointed anymore. She is triggered. Her nervous system is dysregulated.
Oh, man. When the husband tries to defend his spending, he isn't just disagreeing with her, he is gaslighting her reality. When he forgets to book the rental car, he isn't just forgetful. He is employing weaponized incompetence to force her into traditional gender roles.
And here's the genius, terrifying part of the clinical analysis. Using this language forces society and the husband to immediately accommodate the grievance. Because you cannot argue with the diagnosis.
You really can't.
If your partner's just mad, you can tell them to calm down and be reasonable.
Mm.
But if your partner is claiming they're experiencing a trauma response, you have to immediately stop advocating for your own needs and cater to their emotional state.
You cannot tell someone with a clinical symptom to just grow up and learn to tolerate normal frustration. Therapy speak turns ordinary marital friction into profound moral injury. The psychiatrists conclude that long-term relationship success requires deep, sustaining gratitude. But this culture teaches women to keep a meticulous scorecard, to treat gratitude as a naive weakness, and to constantly scan their environment for signs of exploitation.
And because we promise to deliver a comprehensive morning roundup of all the angles, we have to look at how our theological text pushes back against this exact psychological rot. The orthodox theological perspective doesn't view this merely as a clinical psychological issue. They view it as a deep, fundamental spiritual rebellion against the design of the universe.
Right. The theological argument is a hammer blow to modern sensibilities. The text argues that egalitarianism, the pervasive modern idea that men and women are entirely equal in their societal roles, equal in function and fundamentally interchangeable widgets, is a lie.
They call it a modern invention.
They call it a literal tool of Satan, designed specifically in the last 100 years to destroy the family unit. The source asserts a starkly patriarchal, hierarchical worldview. They argue that God himself is a patriarch, that all of creation is built on a strict, God-ordained hierarchy, and that true peace, order, and human flourishing require male headship, male provision, and willing female submission within the home.
It is an incredibly polarizing worldview, but it is gaining massive traction among young men who feel completely alienated by the grievance culture we just outlined. They are looking at the chaos of the egalitarian model and aggressively retreating into ancient, rigid hierarchy as the only viable solution.
So, when you pull all these threads together, what you are seeing across these sources is a complete ideological stalemate. You have millions of young men who are being told by conservative pundits that all of their systemic economic problems are their own fault, that they just need to stop whining, get out of the basement, and pull themselves up by their bootstraps, all while the legal system makes marriage a financial minefield.
Meanwhile, you have millions of young women who are culturally rewarded by social media for endless grievance, taught to view all men with deep suspicion, and told that traditional marriage is literal slavery.
Both sides are barricaded in their respective echo chambers. They are completely isolated, deeply miserable, and heavily medicated. The data notes that antidepressant use has doubled to over 15% of the population.
It is a profound, data-driven picture of a society that has completely lost its foundational script. The floorboards haven't just rotted, they have collapsed into the basement.
So what does this all mean? We promised you a morning roundup synthesis, a way to thread the Daily Wire, the church polity, the ancient theology, and the marriage crisis together into a coherent picture. The grand theme is the undeniable death of top-down systems.
Whether it is the Daily Wire losing its massive audience because of arrogant, mean girl gatekeeping and a total failure to adapt to organic, vitalistic culture.
Or whether it is the centralized church struggling to force confessional unity from a boardroom while local congregants give their loyalty to internet podcasters.
Or whether it is the mid-century, government-subsidized model of the nuclear marriage being entirely shredded by devastating economic realities, no-fault divorce, and toxic feminist therapy speak.
The old ways, the old institutions, the old floorboards are crumbling.
But here's the crucial takeaway. A collapse is not just an ending. A forest fire is destructive, but it's also a vital clearing of the ground. It returns nutrients to the soil. And that means there are incredibly practical, actionable steps you can take today, right now, based on the data we've unpacked.
Let's hear them.
Step 1, audit your media diet immediately. Look incredibly closely at the content you consume and the algorithms you feed. Are you passively absorbing media that rewards grievance, suspicion, and victimhood? Are you listening to gatekeepers who demand your unthinking compliance?
Stop.
Pivot toward creators and communities that are constructive, vitalistic, and building actual alternatives. Stop funding institutions that view you merely as a demographic widget to be monetized.
Step 2, integrate your work. We need to actively adopt the theology of business approach. Stop viewing your daily 9-to-5 labor as a meaningless, secular curse that you endure simply to buy consumer goods on the weekends. Treat your work as an integrated, holistic mission.
Look for ways to bless your immediate community at scale. Like Elijah Craig, look at your town, identify a gap, and build a solution. Construct a multi-generational legacy that passes down tangible physical stability and profound spiritual strength to your children, just like that theological flame lighting another flame.
Step 3, take radical ownership of your relationships. Reject the cultural imperative to externalize your blame. Evaluate yourself with brutal honesty today. Are you using clinical therapy speak as a psychological shield to avoid taking personal responsibility for your own flaws? Are you meticulously keeping score in your marriage instead of practicing grace?
If you want to build a high-trust family in a low-trust world, you have to stop anticipating exploitation, put down the scorecard, and start cultivating genuine, sacrificial gratitude.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought for you to mull over as you navigate your day. If the state government and massive corporate HR departments have successfully replaced the traditional husband as the ultimate provider of human security, and if top-down media empires and centralized religious synods are completely losing their grip on the culture, are we simply destined to become a dystopian society of completely isolated, single, heavily medicated individuals living in sterile corporate pods?
Or is this specific, painful institutional collapse exactly what is required? Is the total destruction of these massive, bloated, top-down bureaucratic systems the necessary prerequisite for new, hyperlocal, deeply integrated, high-trust communities to organically rise from the ashes? Communities built not on corporate algorithms or bureaucratic decrees, but on genuine shared values, deep spiritual roots, and fiercely intact nuclear families.
That is the defining question of our generation. Remember, the map you inherited from your parents is completely out of date. The roads have changed, the bridges have washed out, and the floorboards of the institutions you were taught to trust are entirely rotted through. It is entirely up to you to navigate this wreckage, audit your own life, and decide what you are going to build in the clearing.
We highly encourage you to go track down the original sources we covered today. Read the theology, look at the economic data, explore these intense arguments for yourself, form your own conclusions, and do not be afraid to let the data challenge your worldview.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep digging.